The University of Texas's interim president has committed to defending the status quo inside the embattled institution. This is Friday, March 28th, 2025.
Texas Scorecard presents the day's first news for the Lone Star State. The Texas Minute, with your host, Michael Quinn Sullivan.
Well, we've made it to the end of the week. Thanks for spending part of your Friday with the Texas Minute. Members of the Texas House grilled a Medicaid vendor for hiring private eyes to gather intel on patients, journalists, and even state lawmakers. More on that story coming up. Drawing a clear line in the sand on Second Amendment rights, the Texas Senate has passed legislation that would make it illegal for state or local officials to enforce federal red flag laws, going so far as to criminalize cooperation with such orders. Dubbed the Anti-Red Flag Act, Senate Bill 1362 by Republican Brian Hughes of Mineola passed the chamber on a party line vote of 20 Republicans in favor and the 11 Democrats against. The legislation prohibits the recognition, enforcement, or service of court orders restricting an individual's access to firearms without a criminal conviction. It also bars local governments from accepting federal funding to implement or enforce such orders and declares them, quote, unenforceable within state lines. More investigations have been announced into a controversial Islamic Center in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that's planning a massive housing development called Epic City. Governor Greg Abbott announced yesterday that the Texas State Securities Board has launched an investigation into the East Plano Islamic Center and its affiliated entities for potential violations of state and federal securities laws. According to the governor, the probe centers around whether Epic has failed to comply with legal requirements meant to protect investors from fraud and financial abuse. Epic is already being investigated by Attorney General Ken Paxton as well as the state's Funeral Service Commission. The wave of investigations comes amid growing concerns from critics who say the project may be operating as a self-contained Islamic enclave, potentially at odds with state and federal law. Lawmakers expressed frustration this week after learning that one of the state's largest Medicaid contractors had hired private investigators to gather information on patients, journalists, and even public officials. During testimony before the Texas House Committee on the Delivery of Government Efficiency, Superior Health Plan CEO Mark Sanders confirmed that the company had employed private investigators to look into individuals who had either filed claims or were otherwise connected to company-related disputes. Committee Chairman Giovanni Capriglione of South Lake pressed Sanders on the scope and motivation behind the investigations, citing emails from Sanders to private investigators. The Republican lawmaker then posed a direct question. Had the company ever hired investigators to look into state officials or their families? Shockingly, the answer was yes. This revelation triggered strong reactions from lawmakers, particularly from Republican State Representative Tony Tinderholt of Arlington.
It makes me wonder what the heck they're even doing with you in this position when you conduct yourself like that. I would never, in a million years, consider investigating a legislator for doing their job.
Late yesterday, it was revealed that Sanders had been fired as the company's CEO. The Texas Minute will be right back.
The Luke Macias Show is your access to what happens behind closed doors in Texas politics. Listen weekly to me, your host, Luke Macias, as I break down what is actually happening in conservative politics in the Lone Star State, a state that we all love and cherish. Listen weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. This show is a product of Texas Scorecard.
In his first address to the Faculty Council, the University of Texas at Austin's interim president expressed his solidarity this week with their efforts to maintain power over the institution. Jim Davis told the Faculty Council that, quote, it's obvious we're under public scrutiny, and then went on to suggest that they just needed to do a better job of telling their story. He cited left-wing publications as friends in that effort, specifically naming the Texas Tribune and the Austin American Statesman. The Faculty Council represents the philosophy of shared governance in state universities. Simply, shared governance is when the appointed boards of regents, who are accountable to Texans for managing universities, and their designees, like the chancellors and presidents, share power with an otherwise unaccountable body of university faculty. Legislation moving in the Texas Senate would restore the constitutional governance of the institutions by stripping such faculty entities of power. When pressed by faculty members on the matter, Davis didn't explicitly express a position on the Senate's proposal, but he did say that regents have, quote, an interest in supporting faculty. It's worth noting that constitutionally, regents are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. You can find details on all the stories mentioned today and keep up with the latest news by visiting TexasScorecard.com. If you enjoy the Texas Minute, please give us a rating, and if you have time, leave a review. This is the easiest way to help others find the show. This edition was based on the original reporting of Brandon Waltons and Robert Montoya. Nick Shepard produces the Texas Minute and gets it delivered to your ears. I look forward to seeing you out around the Lone Star State. Have a great weekend.